Okay, this is Sunday, September 24th, and our lesson for today comes from the first 16 chapters of Matthew 20. We've been working our way through Matthew. And this is an example of one of these verses or one of these pericopes, a set of verses, where it doesn't really make sense unless you look at what just happened beforehand. Because this is the story of a landowner who apparently overpays his workers. And this could make sense to say, oh, well, the kingdom of heaven is so generous that everybody gets everything that they need, which is also part of Jesus' teaching, but that's not quite the point of this. So the story, basically, is that a landowner is looking around his space and he says, oh, it's time to harvest. And so he goes into town, drives his pickup in, he goes to the town square where the guys who want to do day labor are gathering, and he says, hey, everybody, come on, I got a lot of work for you to do. Standard rate, day's pay, they all agree to this. Jump in the back of his pickup, he drives them out to his vineyard, and they get to work. They start harvesting the grapes. And he looks around, this job's not going to get done in the time it needs to get done because these grapes really need to be harvested right away. So noontime, he goes back into town, he goes back to the square, some other guys are waiting there. He says, hey, you guys want to work? All right, I got some work for you, climb in, I'll drive you out, I'll pay you what is fair. So noon, these other guys start working, and he's looking around and says, oh boy, I need everybody I can get. So 3 o'clock, he goes back into town. And there's another couple of guys there. And he says, come on, I got some work for you. And, I'll pay you what's fair. And they're just so happy to get some work. They say, sure. So and it's getting late in the day, and he's still impatient. It's like, I still need more. So like 5 o'clock, day's almost over. He goes back into town, and there's a couple of guys there looking for work. And he says, how come you guys aren't working? And they said, nobody's offered us a job. He said, well, come on, I got work for you. Now, who shows up for day labor at 5 o'clock in the afternoon? I'm going to pause that for a moment because I want you to just be thinking about who are these last guys, right? Drives them back out. They're working. They got another hour or so work, and he says, "Okay, day's over. Foreman, pay the guys, but what I want you to do is pay them in the reverse order that they came. So the guys who came at 5 o'clock, they get paid first, and then the guys that came at 3 o'clock, and then the guys at noon, and then the guys that have been there all day long. Well, they're all lined up there, and what the foreman gives the guys who've only been there now, he gives them a day's wage. And they're thinking, oh, sweet, this is going to be awesome because we've been at this all day. We're going to get a bonus because we worked way harder than this. And so then the guys came at 3 o'clock and they get a day's wage, and noon they get a day's wage, and finally they get in there and where'd my cursor go? Here we go. So these guys, the first ones come and they say they thought they would receive more because they worked harder. They also each received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, these last worked only 1 hour, and you gave them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. Right? It wasn't just that they didn't get paid extra because they thought they were maybe going to get paid some more. It was that what the landowner had done was made them to be equal to the guys who had only just shown up. Now, I said that it was important to be able to know what became before this. So in chapter 19 of Matthew, there's the story of a guy who comes to him and says, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, well, you got to obey the law and all these laws. And he says, well, I do that. And Jesus says, well, there's one thing more you could do. You could sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and come and follow me. And the guy says, oh man, I don't think I can do that. And Jesus says to his disciples, it is harder for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven than it is for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. And the disciples are like, why is it so hard for somebody who's wealthy? And we've given up a lot here. Are we going to get something for the, what are we going to be paid for all of our efforts as your followers? And he says, well, you're going to be richly rewarded, but not in the ways that you are thinking of, because riches in the kingdom of heaven are not about having a lot of money. This is not to say that we shouldn't work to be able to provide safety and security for ourselves, and so we have a certain quality of living, but beyond a certain point, making a bunch more money does not make our lives more fulfilling. And Jesus says the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And then he tells this story of the landowner. And what it comes down to is that there's this notion of having status. And these guys who showed up at 5 o'clock, they finally got rousted out of bed because their wives said, come on, the baby's hungry. You got to go make some money. This is not the cream of the crop. The guys who showed up first thing in the morning, they were ready to work and they worked hard all day. Right? Those are the guys you want to have on your team, not these guys that come late. But Jesus is saying everyone is equal in the kingdom of heaven. And this just doesn't seem right. It's not fair. No, it's not fair. The question is, I think, part of the big one for me is it really possible for us to create a society in which everyone is equally valued for who they are, not just for what they do that's of value to others, not for how many grapes they picked? So our challenge is to figure out how it is that we can create and sustain a society in which everyone has worth. Everyone knows that they matter. That's the hard part. All right? Thanks for joining me on this journey.